Today on the Republic Brothers podcast, we discuss how anti-racism created racism in the UK. We also have some updates on Russia and Ukraine and the latest installment of our new segment, The Feed. All that and more right now. Welcome to episode 63 of the Republic Brothers podcast. He's Matt, I'm Mike, and today is June 7th. Hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss our next episode on Thursday. We're starting the show today with the tragic story of Henry Nowak, an 18-year-old first-year accounting and finance student at the University of Southampton in the UK. He was brutally murdered after a major police failure and an ensuing national and international political debate. So here's what happened. On the night of December 3rd, 2025, Henry Nowak was walking home alone after a night out with his university football teammates. As he walked down Belmont Road in the Southampton suburb of Portswood, recording himself singing on Snapchat, he crossed paths with 23-year-old Vickrum Digwa. Digwa was wearing a large 8.3-inch ceremonial dagger sheathed around his neck, in addition to a smaller knife underneath his clothes. Seeing the blade, Nowak began filming Digwa and asked if he was a bad man. Digwa responded, "I am a bad man," and snatched Nowak's phone. Digwa then attacked Nowak, stabbing him 5 times. The fatal wound pierced Nowak's chest, puncturing his lung and severing a major vein behind his collarbone. Digwa's family lived nearby, and his parents and brother quickly arrived at the scene. While Digwa's father initially tried to offer some assistance to Nowak, Digwa and his brother concocted a false story. Digwa's brother called emergency services and claimed that they had been the victims of a racially motivated attack by Nowak. Meanwhile, Digwa's mother hid the murder weapon. When Hampshire police officers arrived, Digwa lied to them, claiming Nowak was drunk, had punched him, used racial slurs, and pulled off his turban. Because of these allegations, arriving officers treated the dying teenager as a hostile suspect rather than a victim. Nowak repeatedly pleaded with officers, saying, "I've been stabbed and I can't breathe," as his lungs filled with blood. One officer dismissed his cries, responding, quote, "Don't think you have, mate." Another male officer openly stated he hasn't been stabbed. Instead of receiving immediate medical care, a dying Nowak was dragged across the gravel, formally arrested for assault, read his rights, and handcuffed behind his back. It took approximately 3 minutes before officers realized the gravity of his wounds and called an ambulance. Nowak lost consciousness and died at the scene shortly after. Medical experts later testified that due to the severity of the chest wound, he likely would not have survived even with immediate medical intervention. Now, let's stop there for a second. At the very least, when someone says that they've been stabbed, you would think that the officers would have been smart enough to at least check him for wounds. How did that not cross any of the officers' minds? They just automatically assumed that the actual suspect was a victim because he played the race card. How many times have we seen that happen?
Many, and it's actually worse than that, because they did check the attacker. They were concerned with a tiny scratch on his face, while they didn't believe the kid laying on the ground when he said he got stabbed. Is it the job of the police not to, quote, trust but verify? Why did they not even look? 5 stab wounds would not be difficult to see if you actually looked. The part the media is not covering is that the knife he stabbed Henry with was stolen. It is illegal to carry an 8-inch blade in the UK, but the country that doesn't want deadly weapons on the streets made an exception for an 8-inch knife that's a ceremonial blade for the Sikhs. Digwa was not Sikh. He stole it. I don't know if you watched the full body cam, but it is shocking. You can see the moment he loses consciousness and takes his last breath, and it didn't even register with the police.
Yeah, the whole thing from start to finish is crazy. And we're only learning about all this now because of the trial and everything. But here's what's even crazier. So while Digwa is sitting in the back of the police car, he's on internal police camera speaking Punjabi to his brother, explicitly agreeing that he's going to fake an injury and then claim self-defense. Now, obviously, these guys aren't very smart. They fooled the cops who responded for sure. But did they really think there wouldn't be a camera in the car? And if they knew there was a camera, did they really think that speaking Punjabi to each other wouldn't later get translated? Like, how dumb can you be?
Well, this was one sick individual. Attack someone, then claim racism. That is how far the UK has fallen. The crime of potentially being racist was worse than violently murdering someone in the eyes of the officers who responded. Can they come back from this? I don't know.
Well, luckily, they did end up getting it right in the end. On May 28th, 2026, a jury at Southampton Crown Court convicted Vickrum Digwa of murder. The judge entirely rejected Digwa's fabrications regarding racism and physical abuse by Nowak. Digwa was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. His mother was also found guilty of assisting and offending for hiding the dagger. Following the trial, police body cam footage of Nowak's arrest was released to the public, sparking widespread outrage. The Independent Office for Police Conduct launched an official investigation into the officer's conduct. Henry's father, Mark Nowak, sharply criticized the police response, calling his son's treatment inhumane and degrading. However, he explicitly pleaded with the public not to let Henry's death be used to fuel racial division or hatred, stating they wanted his legacy to focus on making streets safer and combating knife crime. Now, here's the part that's infuriating. Right-wing political figures argued that the case was evidence of institutional bias or a two-tier policing system, claiming that the officers ignored a dying white teenager out of a hyper-fixation on identity politics and fear of appearing racially insensitive. But Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood condemned these narratives, accusing commentators of hijacking a family tragedy to stoke division. Now you listen to this clip of Keir Starmer talking about George Floyd and tell me he didn't do the exact same thing.
Can I start by expressing shock and anger at the death of George Floyd? This has shone a light on racism and hatred experienced by many in the US and beyond. I'm surprised the Prime Minister hasn't said anything about this yet, but I do hope that next time he speaks to President Trump, he will convey to him the UK's abhorrence about his response to the events.
And the image, I think, will stick with me, and I'm sure it will stick with many, many people, that combination of a man talking about his last breath in that way and an officer apparently unmoved completely by that.
Like you, I was shocked and angered at the killing of George Floyd and the response of President Trump and the US authorities to the peaceful protests, to people rightly demanding justice, has been an affront to humanity. The last week has shone a spotlight on the racism, discrimination and injustice experienced by those from black and minority ethnic communities in the US, in the UK and across the world. On the 25th of May 2020, not only did people see the violence on a street in Minneapolis, but they could see the violence and destruction that structural racism was having on black communities in their own societies as a result of the pandemic. That's why people took to the streets to say Black Lives Matter.
I'm going to go out on the safest limb of all time and say Keir Starmer is the worst Prime Minister in UK history. He's unable to make any tough decisions, but this is not just about Starmer. Nearly all of the UK government went out and took a knee with the protesters for George Floyd. All we got was condolences and requests to wait for an investigation to conclude and tell them what went wrong. The normal path for liberals in the US is to silence people and shame them if they do not agree with you. And Starmer and the Labour Party are using that playbook. Starmer saying Elon Musk tweeting about this was sowing division and wading into foreign politics, but we just showed a video of him doing the same to us. He and everyone in the UK had no problem calling the US racist. They don't like it when we point out their quest to be anti-racist and how that has made them the most racist nation in Europe. They went so far in the other direction that they discriminate against the majority, which is white. Don't worry though, if Starmer keeps going with these policies, Britons will be the minority. Then they can discriminate all they want. I have said the UK is dying in the past, and I'm beginning to think they can't get out of this death spiral. This is just so sad to see. Imagine being in this kid's shoes. The people show up to help you, and you think your savior is here, but instead they don't believe you because you're race. The people who came to help you left you there to die.
Yeah, that's what's so annoying about this too, is how you hear people say all the time, oh, your white privilege is showing. Yet the police show up, and here's this poor white kid laying on the ground saying, I've been stabbed. But because the other guy said that he attacked him and was being racist, they automatically agreed with him. Does that sound like white privilege to you?
Yeah, and they couldn't even be bothered to check.
Like, it would have taken 2 seconds to rip open his shirt and go, oh, he has 5 holes in his chest. Now, here's the real difference between George Floyd and Henry Nowak.
I don't want to read too little into it, Michael. This to me was a horrific thing, which is a stain on the British police, and I do think was a direct consequence of a lot of the fallout from the BLM period, where I think a lot of institutions swung the pendulum too far the other way and began to make terrible miscalculations, as we saw in this moment, where their first thought was to believe a claim of racism which turned out to be untrue. What is your perspective on this?
Well, the parallels between the Henry Nowak killing and George Floyd are undeniable. They use the very same words, the very same dying words, I can't breathe. The difference is this. Henry Nowak actually was who the left pretended and tried to make George Floyd out to be. That was the big difference. You know, we can look at the killing of George Floyd and say it was very sad and it shouldn't have happened and this could have changed or that could have changed. But the fact is, the police were there because George Floyd had committed a crime. George Floyd ingested 4 times the lethal limit of fentanyl. George Floyd then resisted arrest for minutes and minutes on end. And so the use of force by Derek Chauvin was a use of force of last resort. In this case here, you have this poor guy, Henry Nowak, who is bleeding to death on the ground. And the police actually are showing you a 2-tiered system of justice that actually is racially discriminatory. That is all of the things that we were told were going on with the George Floyd case. The difference is in this case, there was absolutely no explanation, no justification whatsoever. It was the police taking the side of a perpetrator over the victim, refusing to believe the victim, I think, pretty clearly on the basis of his race.
That right there is why we brought up George Floyd in the first place. That is the most spot-on explanation you'll hear from anyone about the differences in these cases. Yet Keir Starmer isn't taking a knee for Henry Nowak. George Floyd was a criminal. You heard from the left wing that George Floyd didn't do anything wrong. Henry Nowak actually did not do anything wrong.
I've seen the body cam video of George Floyd in its entirety, and it was partially on George Floyd. He is in the back of a cop car shouting he can't breathe when the police aren't touching him. The cops were saying sit up and we'll roll the windows down. It wasn't like George Floyd didn't make massive mistakes in that encounter with police. There were many places he could have made it better. This kid had nothing he could do. Michael Knowles had a great breakdown there, as you said. Didn't I say in the last episode, the left has a weird way of picking their martyrs? Why would you pick this guy? My guess would be it was a white cop and a black suspect. Shout racism and hope nobody checks. We saw just how big of a scam the whole BLM movement was. Nice that it enriched the few black people in charge of it, but it didn't actually help anyone.
Yeah, now I have this breakdown from Konstantin Kisin. It's kind of a long video. We chopped it up a little bit, but it is worth the listen.
Cast your mind back exactly 6 years. It's the summer of 2020 and Britain is undergoing what its commentariat breathlessly describes as a reckoning. The murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer sent hundreds of thousands of British people into the streets. Statues were toppled. Corporations issued groveling statements. Police officers British police officers in British cities policing British people took a knee before the protesters. The message, repeated endlessly by politicians, journalists and institutions of every kind, was unambiguous. Racism kills, and we will do whatever it takes to make sure it never happens again.
Sorry, we just got attacked racially by some white person.
Godfrey, what did he say? Was he racially abusive?
The police need a report. Come here. Yeah, he was. Do you want to speak to my brother? He's then laid a punch onto me. He's pushed me back and my turban's come off.
6 years later, an 18-year-old student named Henry Nowak was stabbed 5 times on a Southampton street. As he lay bleeding, he told the police officers who arrived at the scene exactly what had happened. He had been stabbed by Vickrum Digwa, who was standing nearby. Digwa, for his part, told the officers something else, that he had been the victim of a racist attack. The officers believed Digwa and handcuffed Nowak. As he lost consciousness, he could be heard on bodycam footage repeating the words, "I can't breathe." The same 4 words that 6 years earlier had become the defining phrase of a political movement. They were stenciled on murals, chanted at marches, printed on T-shirts. They were spoken on the floor of the United States Congress and quoted in parliamentary debates in Westminster. When British police officers knelt in the streets of London, it was those words they were kneeling for. Henry Nowak's last words, captured on bodycam footage released by Hampshire police in the small hours of a Tuesday morning, the middle of the night when the fewest people would see it, were the same. "I can't breathe." He said them while handcuffed on the pavement, bleeding from 5 stab wounds, to officers who had decided that the man who put those wounds in him was the real victim. You will not see Henry's words stenciled on a mural. No politicians will quote them in the Commons. No corporation will change its logo. The same establishment that made 4 words immortal when spoken by a black man in Minneapolis has met the same 4 words spoken by a white boy dying on a street in Southampton with what can only be described as a determined institutional silence. That silence is not neutral. It is a statement. It tells you exactly whose suffering the system has decided counts and whose does not. And it was produced not by the old racism, not by skinheads and yobs, but by the people who spent 6 years telling you they had abolished it. Digwa was convicted of murder last week and sentenced to life imprisonment. Hampshire police issued a public apology. The IOPC launched an investigation. And a country that had spent the better part of a decade being lectured about the unique and unforgivable evil of racism was left to contemplate what its anti-racism had actually produced. The answer, if you're willing to look at it honestly, is this: a new form of racism, a bureaucratic racism, an actually institutionalized racism, a racism so thoroughly laundered through the language of progress and inclusion that the people enforcing it genuinely believe they're on the right side of history. What else do you call a system in which a dying teenager's word counts for less than his killer's because of the color of his skin? To understand how we got here, you have to understand what the post-Floyd reckoning actually did to British institutions, especially the police. The response to Floyd's death wasn't merely emotional. It was ideological and it was systematic. Forces across the country underwent mandatory diversity and anti-racism training. The principle drilled into officers explicitly or implicitly was that accusations of racism must be taken with the utmost seriousness, that the historic failure of institutions to believe minority victims of racism was the original sin, and it needed atoning for. Racism is bad. Attempting to address it is good. The problem is what happens when you apply it without judgment in the real world. You train officers to weight an allegation of racism so heavily that it overrides the evidence in front of their eyes. You produce exactly the outcome we saw in Southampton.
As well as it can be said, I've watched Konstantin Kisin's podcast for many years. He has a great grasp on what is going wrong with Europe. He's a Russian-born national who immigrated to the United Kingdom legally, and he doesn't want to see the nation he moved to die. But he is well aware it is falling apart. The quest to be anti-racist led to them being more racist. This should tell you something about the morals of nations. How people are raised and what religion they are make a big difference. Not all cultures are equal. How many other nations are there where the majority of the population is the part that is treated worse than the minorities? The objective of the West was to treat everyone the same, yet they lower the bar for minorities and say they treat them differently because they had a tougher life because of their skin color. This is the common socialist way of making things equal. Rather than keeping standards high and raising the bar for everyone, they drag the people at the top down.
Yeah, there's still people out there that are defending the actions of the police. Like on this original post from Konstantin, where he posted this 7-minute video, the comments on this video from people were saying that the police didn't do anything wrong and all sorts of things. There are people out there who say that they acted correctly given the racism in society and that they were right to assume Henry was the perpetrator. Is that not proof of the two-tier policing system that we mentioned at the beginning of this?
That is proof of the two-tier system. And people saying the police on scene did nothing wrong are kind of proving our point. They did, in a way, follow the rules they were taught. And rather than check to see if the kid on the ground was okay, they judged by the color of the skin and what claims were made, not to be seen as a racist. Nigel Farage said he talked to many police officers throughout the country, and their biggest fear is an accusation of racism. That claim against you ends your career whether it's true or not. They aren't worried about being in a fight for their life and potentially dying from a knife fight or a gunfight. They're more concerned if someone says they were insensitive towards their race. It tells you everything you need to know as well that when Nigel Farage stood up and told Keir Starmer, if you don't act now and change the two-tier policing system, all Keir Starmer could do was get up and say Keir Starmer wanted violence to sow racial division. Keir Starmer gave him a simple warning. If you don't do something, it will get worse. That's not condoning violence. Just because he didn't say it in that exact moment, even though he said it many times, doesn't mean Farage wants racial division and unrest in the streets of the United Kingdom. It's pretty clear to everyone with eyes and common sense that Nigel Farage is more connected with the people in the UK. That's why his party just won in a landslide in the latest elections, which were not even a month ago. The average person in the UK is with Nigel Farage on this situation, but the left's ideology does not allow them to shift their position.
Yeah, going back to the whole claim you said too about people claiming that you're racist, we see that all the time. Like daily, you see that on the internet. Anytime someone says anything that someone doesn't agree with, you immediately get called racist or bigot. Like right off the top. That is the first thing they say.
Do you remember the days when being called a racist was life-ending? Now they throw it out there any chance they get. It means absolutely nothing now.
Yeah, it literally means nothing. Like, people will call you that over for the dumbest thing, and it's like you've overused it at this point, and now you can say that all you want, and people are like, all right, whatever.
Yeah, Trump's first term when COVID started. Trump banned flights from China to prevent the spread of COVID, which the left thinks was the greatest tragedy ever. Yet when Trump did that, he was labeled racist and xenophobic and bigoted and every other ism you could think of.
All right, well, we have been harping on this for a while. We could go on and on about this, and I'm sure we'll circle back to it at some point. But let's move things along here. The next thing I want to talk about, this story is straight out of the crazy handbook for Democrats.
Kathy Hochul signs this bill sitting on her desk. A new law will make it illegal to call them mother and father. Nate Foy has the details on this. Nate?
Hey, Jackie. So, yeah, New York Democrats argue the words mother and father are outdated and need to be replaced with more inclusive terms under state law. All that's needed now is Governor Kathy Hochul's signature. So if Hochul approves, in New York's family court and in domestic and education law, a mother would be labeled as a gestating parent, a father as a non-gestating parent, and paternity proceedings to determine the child's father would be called parentage proceedings. The bill passed the state Senate this week and the state assembly back in March. Governor Hochul proudly calls herself New York's first mom governor. It's unclear if she'll support this change, though.
I'm not familiar with what was introduced late last night, so I'll take a look at it. I have until the end of the year to review them and make a decision, so I won't be commenting on pending legislation.
New York would join other states like Massachusetts, California, Connecticut, and Colorado to change the definition and wording of parents in their state laws. Democrats argue the bill is necessary to accommodate surrogacy cases and same-sex couples. Now, Governor Hochul's up for re-election this year. Her main challenger, Republican Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman, tells Fox this morning this bill is a continuation of war declared on families by Democrats. Jackie?
Nate, thank you.
Gestating and non-gestating parent. You know, Matt, that sounds a lot like the difference between a man and a woman. But the left still can't admit that men and women are different.
Parentage? What the crap are we getting on about now? It's as if we forgot about basic human biology, and the party of science thinks men can get pregnant. Matt Walsh said it best, in my opinion. There are people with the ability to get pregnant and those who can't get pregnant. And if someone is of the genetic composition to get pregnant but can't, it's not a new gender. Something went wrong. If you see someone with one leg, does that mean legs are a spectrum and you can have no legs or you can have 100 legs? No, something went wrong. Humans have 2 legs. This is the collapse of Western civilization if we can't get back to the science that the left loves to cite.
Yes, trust the science. I can only tell you, as a father, if I was in the delivery room and a nurse walked in and asked me if I was the non-gestating parent,
you would say no.
What? I'd say no, I'm the father. Like, why can't we just call it what it is? Why do we have to come up with all these different terms so that we don't hurt somebody's feeling? Anyone that is a father, why would you not want to be called a father? Anyone that's a mother, why would you not want to be called the mother? That is that is a good thing. Being a mother or a father means something.
We are so concerned with people who are mentally ill not being offended that we're willing to throw out science and language to accommodate their feelings. We have to get away from that. This ideology is how you destroy a nation. It's that simple. You're so disconnected from reality that nothing will make sense and no words will have meanings. If we don't get away from it, we will end as a nation.
I would just like one time for my family to be at the park and for some blue-haired liberal to walk up to me and ask me if I am the non-gestating parent, or ask my wife if she is the gestating parent, so that I can look at them and say, are you assuming our genders? What would make you assume that I am the non-gestating parent? Why would you think that? I would just love to see their brain completely malfunction when I gave them that response.
Yeah, and these are people who generally aren't well educated, despite the fact that many of them actually went to college. They can't have a conversation about facts. The only thing that they know is their gender identity or their sexual identity, and they want everyone to be judged based on that. That's how they get high-level positions. If you can't determine what identity you are and what sex you are, how are you ever going to advance? The only way you can is if civilization decides that your identity as a race and a gender is what's going to move you forward. We have talked about this many times off podcast. The left loves this because it's just about what box you can check and how much of a victim status you can claim. I've told people in our family they should claim to be black, lesbian, transgender minorities all the time because it'll help you get some government contracts and it's great for business.
Yeah, I think this whole story, though, it just proves that deep down, they do know there is a difference between men and women. Like, it's there. They just don't want to say it out loud.
Yes, but if they admit it, their entire ideology collapses. That's why they can't admit it.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying about how people identify, that reminds me of a clip from when Charlie Kirk was on a campus and a guy came up to the mic and said that he was a gay conservative and yada, yada, yada. And Charlie Kirk responded that you shouldn't have to start off with, I'm a gay anything. That's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Just say you're a conservative. Why do you have to add the gay in front of it? The decisions that you make in the bedroom should not be your identity.
Yeah, and that's how it should be. In the West, that's how it is. Nobody's going to know for sure who you sleep with in the bedroom if you don't actively advertise it. But the left makes it a point to actively advertise it. They want you to go out there and show everyone you're gay or trans or queer and make that your identity. They do that with minorities. They want minorities to vote in a bloc. We're starting to see the end of that, which is great for the nation. All right, let's keep this moving. We have not had a discussion about the Russia-Ukraine war in a while, so let's get into this and discuss what's happened over the last week or two. This week has been another stark reminder that despite occasional talk and the occasional negotiations and peace proposals, the war between Russia and Ukraine remains as dangerous and unpredictable as ever. Over the past several days, we've seen a significant escalation in both military and political dimensions of this conflict. Russia launched one of its largest aerial assaults of the war, firing hundreds of drones and missiles at targets across Ukraine. Ukrainian officials reported civilian casualties, damaged infrastructure, and widespread disruption, particularly around Kiev. According to Ukraine's Air Force, the scale of these attacks was among the largest seen since the full-scale invasion began in 2022.
So what exactly caused Russia to all of a sudden go full bore again at this? Like, why now?
Russia never really stopped going after them at 100%. Russia really just depleted their missile and drone stockpiles, keeping in mind with Iran now fully occupied with something else. Drone flows have slowed. Russia spent some time restocking ballistic missiles and drones, and then they got a stockpile of them, and they decided to unleash a barrage on Ukraine. The reason you send them all at once is so that you overwhelm the defense systems. It's easy to shoot down one missile that's sent at your city. It's hard to shoot down dozens or hundreds of them. This is all done as part of politics. Putin needs to be seen as strong. He also is hoping that he can pound the Ukrainians into submission and fear the Ukrainian population into convincing their own government that they give in and that's what's best for them. That's not going to happen at this point. Russia is now seen as a lifelong enemy for generations to come. There's no forgetting what the Ukrainian people have been through over the last 4.5 years. Vladimir Putin, in his attempt to quickly overwhelm Ukrainian defenses, failed, and it created a generational hatred of Russians inside Ukraine, which was seen as essentially the brothers of Russian people. While all of that is happening, Ukraine has demonstrated that it remains capable of striking deep inside of Russia. Ukrainian drones target sites in St. Petersburg, damaging infrastructure and creating an embarrassing moment for the Kremlin, just as Russia was preparing to host its annual St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, often called the Russian version of Davos. The attack served as another reminder that the war is no longer confined to the front lines. Ukraine's strategy of targeting military and economic assets deep inside of Russian territory appears designed to increase pressure on Moscow while demonstrating that Russia cannot fully shield itself from the consequences of this conflict. It is no secret that Vladimir Putin reached out to Donald Trump asking for a ceasefire for a few days to have this meeting, which is their version of Davos. Ukraine's Zelensky got word of that after Trump essentially said no, and sent a letter to Putin saying he would allow him to have his meeting in St. Petersburg and he would be willing to meet. This is all for political gains designed to make Putin look weak. Zelensky told Putin he could have his meeting, then struck an oil refinery on the outskirts of St. Petersburg, so when everyone got together, they would see the black smoke on the horizon. Zelensky made it clear no part of Russia is immune, and undermined some of Putin's talking points. Putin needs to look strong, and Zelensky made it a point to try and undermine that.
So what are the conditions like in Ukraine and Russia during all this? Now, we obviously have our own thing going on with Iran right now, and everyone sees the price at the pump. But what are the real-world effects for the citizens of Russia and Ukraine?
For Ukraine, it's absolutely tougher. Your enemy will shoot at anything, so your apartment is a potential target. Russia loves to target energy infrastructure and transportation with the hopes of brutally punishing the citizens into submission. The hope was the people of Ukraine would crack and force the government to give in to Russia. That is why Ukraine sees strikes against food and agriculture in the summer, and strikes against energy infrastructure in the winter. Freeze them out in the winter and starve them in the summer. That's the goal of the Russians. For the average person in Moscow or St. Petersburg, there's no significant difference. Energy prices are up, yes, and there is the occasional strike near air bases or oil refineries, but they're not being hit by the missile or drone strikes like the average Ukrainian citizen. The Russians in other places don't feel the same. The wealth in Russia is basically in two cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg. Those are the areas that keep Putin in power, so the military recruitment came from other places. Putin doesn't want the ones with the money to want to change at the top. If you are from another place in Russia, you may not have felt a direct impact through drones or missile strikes, but odds are extremely high that someone very close to them went to the front line and served and never came home. Reports now say Russia has lost around 2 million people. 2 million casualties compared to a population of 144 million before the war. And Russia was not a country experiencing population growth. This is devastating long term. And when the war ends, it will get far worse for the Russians and the Ukrainians. The economies of both nations will collapse when the war ends. Simple as that. Ukraine has one advantage, and that's that they have the West on their side.
Could you imagine if, in this whole thing with us and Iran, if we had 2 million casualties? Even you and I at this point, even though we like Trump and we support what he's doing with Iran, if we had 2 million casualties, I feel fairly confident that you and I would both be sitting here saying that this was a huge mistake.
It's tough to envision a scenario where you and I would sit here and say we were fighting for our lives.
Also true.
If we weren't fighting for our lives, there's no way we would accept 2 million casualties. It's that simple. The simple reality is when you're the dictator of a nation, you can take more casualties because you've spent decades instilling fear into your own people to accept whatever you do because it's for the best of your nation. Freedom of information is a real thing, and that's not real in Russia. You and I have way more access to the internet than the average Russian, and they don't understand fully what is happening. The average Russian isn't on YouTube or Instagram or Facebook seeing all the videos coming out of Ukraine. They don't truly know what is happening. I've seen stories, and I mostly agree with them, that Russian athletes actually shouldn't be banned from the Olympics because the average Russian athlete doesn't have anything to do with the war. I understand why you did it in the first place, but these are people who have no bearing on how this goes. Vladimir Putin is not calling the star tennis player to the front lines because he knows how devastating that would be internally. There's many interesting topics we could explore with this. Politically, the week was notable because hopes for direct talks between Putin and Zelensky took another massive hit. Zelensky signaled interest in a face-to-face meeting, but Putin dismissed the idea, saying he saw no point in such a meeting at this stage. Putin also reiterated that Russia intends to achieve its war goals, suggesting that neither side is currently prepared to make the compromises necessary for a negotiated settlement. That reality is becoming increasingly clear. Nearly 4.5 years into the full-scale war, both sides continue to believe they can improve their position. Ukraine hopes that long-range strikes, international support, and continued resistance will eventually force Moscow to negotiate seriously. Russia appears to believe that time remains on its side and that sustained military pressure can gradually wear Ukraine down. The result is a conflict that shows few signs of ending anytime soon. With Donald Trump and the United States distracted by Iran, there is no pressure on Ukraine to end this. Now, one of the more unusual stories this week involved commentator Candace Owens. Candace traveled to Russia to attend the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where she participated in panel discussions and commented on U.S. support for Ukraine. During appearances at the event, she questioned continued American funding for Ukraine and argued that many Americans are increasingly skeptical about where that money is going. Her presence drew significant attention because the forum has become a showcase for Russia's efforts to demonstrate that it still has influential supporters and sympathetic voices in the West despite international sanctions and isolation. Whether one agrees with Candace Owens or not, which we generally are ones that don't, her appearance highlights a broader issue that has become increasingly important in the war: the battle for public opinion. Russia and Ukraine are not only fighting on the battlefield, they are competing for support among voters, politicians, media personalities, and audiences around the world. As the war drags on, maintaining that support may become just as important as any military operation. Propaganda is a massive thing and can sway the outcome of a war. It is used for international purposes and internal purposes. Iran loves to see us say we're losing, despite the facts being the opposite. Russia loves having American citizens come over to the motherland and preach to the dictators about how great they are and how questionable we are. So as we look back on the past week, the picture is familiar but troubling. Massive Russian strikes, Ukrainian attacks deep inside Russian territory, diplomatic efforts going nowhere, and growing debates in the West about how long support for Ukraine can continue. The war remains locked in a cycle of escalation, retaliation, and political maneuvering. And if this week is any indication, neither Moscow nor Kiev believe the end is anywhere in sight. Who is willing to stick with this? I think Ukraine and Russia both see this as a fight for their lives, but for different reasons. Ukraine does not want Russian rule, so it will fight for their life. Russia knows they have a massive landmass with a small population, and they can't defend all of it on their own with a large but slow-moving military. Russia needs to move forward and use geographic barriers like oceans, rivers, mountains, or deserts to help prevent invasion. This will not be ending anytime soon, but I think with the current arrangement, it is worth continuing on. We are weakening one of our greatest enemies from a U.S. perspective. I know it costs us money, but now that the Europeans are starting to pay for some of those weapons, it makes it a little more palatable.
Yeah, every day this drags on, Russia gets weaker and weaker. Is Putin not even thinking about that? This war with Ukraine is going to have lasting effects on Russia long after this war is over.
Weaker in the long term, absolutely. Putin most likely thinks about keeping power and nothing else. The important part for Putin is making sure everyone sees him as the strong man, because in dictatorships, you can't be seen as weak. Being seen as weak means you are overthrown. Staying alive is a powerful thing, and that's what keeps them moving. It has been a talking point in Europe for the last couple weeks that all of the money and all of the capital in Russia is going to the warfighting machine. So when this ends, the Russian economy will collapse. The same is almost certainly true of Ukraine. GDP is a total number of spending, and Ukraine and Russia are both spending massive amounts of government money on military and defense. That counts towards GDP. That's why the economies aren't dead yet. The moment the warfighting machine ends and the government stops spending money on the warfighting machine, the economies are going to go into massive recessions.
All right, well, we spent a bunch of time today talking about Henry Nowak and that whole situation, a bunch of time talking about Russia and Ukraine. Let's get to the end of the show, everyone. It is time for The Feed. This is the segment where we take all the funny videos we saw on our social media feeds this week and break them down. So without further ado, here is clip number 1.
Can we talk about the California school district that is making little girls sign a mental health declaration saying that they have a disorder if they don't want to share the bathroom with biological boys? We've really reached the point where we are telling little girls that in order to make Little Miss Dysphoria feel validated, we are going to make you compromise your security, mental clarity, and classify yourself as mentally unstable. And let's make sure that we keep the records on file so that they can potentially follow you for the rest of your education and career. And the main people who are actually standing up to do something about it are the little boys who happen to also be in that school district. So where are the adults and where are the parents?
This is absolutely insane. We have a school that's making normal kids sign a document claiming they're the ones with a mental illness just so that they don't have to share a bathroom with someone who's pretending to be the opposite gender. How crazy is that?
Jeez. You are mentally ill if you don't affirm someone else's mental illness. The ideology of the left is how you destroy a great nation. The UK as an example. We need to eradicate that or we will meet the same fate. Henry Nowak was a casualty of that, and we would be wise to get rid of it.
All right, now here's our next clip.
Eating meat is inherently wrong. And then the other thing is, two things cannot coincide. I love animals. I love all animals so much, and I eat meat. You can't do both. Sorry. You can eat meat. Go for it. You can love animals, but you can't do both.
Now, we've all seen this clip or heard about it at some point. Billie Eilish, she really just needs to stay away from cameras for a little while. This is dumber than her stolen land comments a few months ago. Hey, Billie, you can't say you love your fans, but then still charge them to come see you. You also can't say you love the environment, but still tour the world on private jets. Do you see how silly that sounds?
Yeah, she still hasn't given up that mansion she owns on stolen land. Complete lack of understanding of how the world works.
All right, now here is clip number 3.
Is there, like, a rule that I'm missing where only the United States is allowed to have a nuclear weapon?
Yes, it's called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It was opened up for signature in 1968, started to be enforced in 1970. It was an international treaty that basically said everyone that currently has nukes can keep them, but those countries are never allowed to transfer nuclear material to other nations that don't have them, and any nation that didn't currently have nuclear weapons could not then develop them. 191 countries signed it. At the time it was signed, there were only 3 countries that refused to sign. Those countries were India, Israel, and Pakistan. Now, there is a 4th country that didn't sign, South Sudan, but they came later because they were founded in 2011. But just to be clear, Iran signed this. Iran signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, stating that they would never develop nuclear weapons. So yeah, when you're asking, like, if there's a rule, yes, it's an international treaty that's been in place for 55 years. So there you go.
Yes, And some countries lie and still go after nuclear weapons. Nukes are seen as the ultimate security guarantee, so nations still try to get their hands on them. Iran is the perfect example. Oh, how the tables have turned. Terrorist regimes do not care about the rest of the world.
Yep, turns out there is a rule, and Iran broke the rules, just like they always do.
And the question is whether they would use them, which we believe they would use them. Given they say they want to destroy us, I like to assume the answer is yes. They said it's yes, so why would you believe they're lying on that part?
All right, here is clip number 4.
Who are you voting for?
It's Yaraman.
Why her over Bass?
Well, she's Indian and I'm South Asian.
Respect.
So
What do you think about Spencer Pratt?
not much.
Do you think he has a chance?
I don't know. Do you?
I mean, if people are willing to elect Trump, some people just want to vote for the white guy.
That's true.
Just because they're white.
That's unfortunate.
What do you think about that? People voting on like based on like race and stuff.
I think it's a kind of unfortunate because you should be looking at someone's credentials, really.
This guy literally stood there saying that he was going to vote for the Indian woman just because she's Indian, and then said it's bad that other people are going to do the exact same thing. There should be more rules on who is allowed to vote. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. Look at the credentials, he said. If you put an IQ test on the ballot box so only people who understand the world can vote, he doesn't get a vote.
All right, and here is our very last clip.
Which other place in the Middle East do you think that as a queer person you would have complete and utter liberation?
Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, pretty much a lot of the Middle East.
So you can go to gay pride there.
Also, yeah, no, we can't go to gay pride there because in the Middle East it is illegal to be gay there.
We cannot be serious here. You can't even legally be gay in those countries, but people will tell you that America is a bad country. These people have zero clue how good they actually have it here.
Yeah. Lebanon, Syria, Yemen. Wow. Illegal to be gay in those nations. She even says that, yet can't comprehend how bad it is. Israel is the only nation with Western values in the Middle East, yet they can't see it. They cannot accept that the Jewish people are the ones that uphold Western values.
Yeah, these clips today were full of stupidity. Well, everyone, that is it for episode 63 of the Republic Brothers podcast. Before you click away, please hit the subscribe or follow button. New episodes drop every Monday and Thursday. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.